Thank you all for being here. Today is August 28th. This is a special committee on long-term health care. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Sanye. Christine Ingracia.
Present.
Danielle Spragley.
Present.
Jamie Opsel.
Present.
Marjorie Moore.
Present.
Harold Braswell.
Present.
Chris Beckley. Cassandra Kaufman. Lavita Richardson. Cindy Jackson. Kevin Anthony. Andrew Lackey.
Present.
Laura Barrett.
Present.
Kathleen Holmes.
Present.
Annalise Stover. Chair Aldrich.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Sanye. Chris Beckley. Cassandra Kaufman. Lavita Richardson. Cindy Jackson. Kevin Anthony. Annalise Stover. We have 9 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from Monday, August 14th, 2023.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, call the roll.
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Holmes.
Thank you. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Sanye. Christine Ingracia.
Aye.
Danielle Spragley. Danielle Spragley. Jamie Opsel.
Aye.
Marjorie Moore.
Aye.
Harold Braswell.
Aye.
Chris Beckley. Cassandra Kaufman. Lavita Richardson. Cindy Jackson. Kevin Anthony. Andrew Lackey.
Aye.
Laura Barrett.
Aye.
Kathleen Holmes.
Aye.
Annalise Stover. Chair Aldrich.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Sanye. Chris Beckley. Cassandra Kaufman. Lavita Richardson. Cindy Jackson. Kevin Anthony. Annalise Stover. We have 9 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, next we will go into committee discussion. Before we go into the report, first I want to say it feels good to be live in person, to see all the committee members, and to thank you to SEIU for allowing us to be here for the first live meeting for the Special Committee on Long-Term Healthcare. So as we go into the committee discussion, this will be one of many discussions that we talk about with the report. So in front of each committee member, we have a rough draft of what our report can look like. This is, like I said, a rough draft of a lot of work that committee members have put in prior to me under former Chair Alderwoman Christine Ingracia, which I appreciate all the work that she put into and making sure that committee members and the committee continue to move forward. And with that, before I pass it over to Laura from SEIU to give kind of a rough overview of what the committee is, or what the rough draft is, even though it was sent to everybody. So this is just, like I say, like step one of us talking about the report. I know several members are not here today, so after today's meeting, I will send out an email so that we can have one more via Zoom meeting to make sure that committee members that was not present to be able to weigh in on the report have an opportunity to weigh in on the report. My idea of what this could look like, but this is totally open to the committee, is the first stage is us going over what a rough draft is during the discussion today. We'll get input from committee members on what needs to be added, potentially any errors that are in it, things that we potentially missed that is not in this. The second phase would be kind of a design element of added on to the committee, making sure that we get input from long-term healthcare workers as well as residents who are affected by it. And then the third phase would be kind of what does a media rollout plan looks like, so that all the hard work that we put into this committee, which is a first of a kind, first one in the region, I would say first even in the state, so that people are aware about this report. So not just potentially the Board of Aldermen, which I know President Megan Green has charged this committee to come up with recommendations and is serious about not just coming up with recommendations, but trying to figure out how do we turn these recommendations to actual legislation, but also can be a framework for other municipalities throughout our region to do the same, as well as charge some of these recommendations to our state and federal partners to also pick up these recommendations. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lord to just kind of give a brief overview of what is all in the report, and then open it up to the committee for us to dive into any input changes or edits that we need to make.
Great. I think this is going to look very familiar to the members of the committee.
Need a mic.
Okay.
You may need that.
Can you grab that one?
Take the.
Just the whole thing. Yeah. I think this is going to look very familiar to everyone who's on the committee. We talked about these three trends pretty extensively, and the rough draft just basically goes through and identifies some real proof, some citing, and really backs up all of the stuff that we had done in this committee. We actually started by quoting extensively folks who have been on the committee, and it just got so messy that it felt like it was a lot cleaner to take some of the quotes out and just go ahead and talk about the trends that we've seen. So the three trends are changes in ownership, changes in who the residents are themselves, and changes in staffing practices. And what we've seen is that in St. Louis, the nursing homes have almost all become for-profit nursing homes. And the reason why that's a problem is that they're now run to make money for their owners, right? So instead of being nonprofit entities which were created to serve the folks who are living there, they're a real estate investment that really starts to produce revenue. And there's all sorts of ways that hedge fund owners who have come into the nursing home market have figured out to create more revenue. As you can see, we have a pretty good case study in here of Blue Circle. And the reason why we have that is because there's a whole bunch of financial information that we were able to get from that the union was able to get from Blue Circle during our negotiations with them and the unfair labor practice that we filed. And so we were then able to access all sorts of really very specific and very interesting information about this particular entity. And it follows the money basically through what happened from the minute that it was acquired until today. One reason why Blue Circle is so important is that it has a VA contract. And so this is federal money from a couple of different places, from Medicare, Medicaid, and then also from the VA, that they're taking and using for their own purposes. You guys can read the details on here, but it's pretty amazing. The day that they bought the building, what the poll says, the company purchased these assets on April 2nd, and the day after Brecker ownership group had taken over operation of the facility. So they knew what they were going to do right when they bought the facility. If you're going to have this company, the management company, and here's the ownership company, just the shell game started going on immediately. And I think that, so like this isn't, we're not saying, I think this is also Lenny's testimony that he gave before the committee. We're not saying that every single for-profit is exactly like this, but at least shows some things that can possibly happen when you have a for-profit take over the finances. Then we go into the impact, so like that just basically is the ownership piece. Then we go to the impact on resident care, which we've heard a lot about in the committee, so that is really the issue where we've got folks who are younger and have severe mental illness or have been entering, especially the St. Louis market in nursing homes. And this is an interesting trend that's taking place across the state, but in St. Louis it's a little bit more pronounced because we do have, because of the institutional racism that influences our healthcare system. So all of the nursing homes in St. Louis most of them are in low-income areas staffed by Black workers who care for Black residents, and they are getting the worst care because for-profits are taking the for-profit owners are taking the money out of them and then basically providing just unacceptable levels of care. We have the second worst care hours in the country. You all know this, and we went over it. So anyway, that documents all this. And so I think this is gonna be interesting to other folks, because they may see this in their own states or their own cities, but unfortunately, we're such a bad example that I think it's gonna be helpful for other folks to see how this actually plays out in terms of resident care. Just one of the bullets on here, almost 40% of those in St. Louis City nursing homes have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And the age has just dropped, right? So they're much younger, more vigorous folks, and the training just has not happened, right? So the de-escalation training that staff really need in order to work with these residents is not happening, even though there's quite a few homes in which they are the majority of folks in the building. So then we go into the whole thing about serious folks with serious mental illness, and then mention the DOJ investigation, which is ongoing. We are unable to get the results of the DOJ investigation yet because it's not done yet. But what we know is the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division looked at Missouri and said, there's a big problem here. Folks with severe mental illness are being unduly confined in nursing homes. This is not a good placement for them. And so that's what they're investigating right now. Hopefully we'll have the results from that soon. But I think it's, it's not just us noticing this stuff. So it's good to see the Department of Justice is getting some more information. There's a typo right there. We'll be able to help us on that. But then, of course, is the staffing crisis. So there's a lot of folks who are leaving the field, and that is impacting resident care. It's also making it very hard for the workers who are left. So the folks that are still here are working very, very hard. They're working a lot of hours, a lot of overtime, and that is ending up with us having less staff time devoted to residents because folks are simply running when they're on their shift. So one of the great quotes I think in this is, you don't have a staff shortage, you've got a good job shortage from the long-term care, Mark Miller. You have to pay these people, you have to provide them support. Nursing home owners will continue to struggle to recruit and retain workers until they increase wages. So I think that kind of sums that up. And then we go into resident care. There's quite a bit of documentation on this. And this a staffing standard being needed. We believe that President Biden is going to be presenting a staffing standard, which we're really excited about. Hopefully happens really soon. And I'm sure Representative Bush is going to be interested in that. But nursing homes are going to be advocating against it, so we're going to have to be strong on the advocate side. Then it goes into the recommendations. I'm sure that's the part you guys that we're all interested in. On the city level, kind of distill these a little bit. So there's a few less than we may have talked about in committee, but hopefully these themes will help us to really go where we need to with this. We believe that supporting and expanding the healthcare worker safety fund is important on the city level. Creating a permanent nursing home ombudsman position responsible for helping workers and residents access appropriate mental health and safety resources like OSHA, et cetera. And then, Alderwoman Boyd said it's a great example last week of how to conduct a regular wellness check by going off the hillside and making sure that they had air conditioning. So she had gone out earlier and they brought all the individual units in. She went out last week when it was really very hot. I went with her and we had our shop steward there as well. Just to make sure they were working and make sure everybody's okay during that horrible weather crisis. So that was it's great that she's following up and doing that kind of stuff. We think that's important for nursing home residents, partially because these buildings are just so old, right? And so it's just their physical plants are worn out and owners are not investing in that. Then we talk about what should happen on the state level. I think what we discovered in this committee is that the federal government is really says to the state, okay, here's the money, here's what you guys have to do to make this all work. And so it's really, the state has a lot of responsibility here. They're the inspectors, they're the ones who find nursing homes, they're the ones who are constant, who are very, very far behind, as we learned from Tracy Meekham's testimony. So we have recommendations about filling those surveyor positions. There's 22 positions at the state level currently vacant, which is a real problem. And then also restoring the $2.2 million increase to the long-term care ombudsman program that Governor Parsons vetoed. So we believe that that needs to happen, and we also need more surveyors, and the whole system around surveying or nursing home inspection has got to be brought back into a strategic plan, and it's got to be done on a regular basis. Right now, they're so short-staffed, they're just only responding to crises. That's not the way the system was built, that's not what was intended, and it must change. On the federal level, we also had, have the mention of nursing home staff, our standard. We hope to work with all of the federal, delegation to get some of these federal changes completed. So that's pretty much what you. Yeah. That's pretty much, I think, what we covered in the paper. I just have to say that it's been an amazing privilege to sit on this committee along with the rest of you, and I really appreciate how seriously everybody on the committee has taken this. And I think that what we've got here is the product of a lot of work, a lot of effort, and I think it's just really fairly brilliant. So I'm really excited to see what happens when we release this to the world. So yeah, what thoughts do folks have? We've had not a whole lot of time to review it, but.
With that, I'm gonna open it up to any committee members. Any committee members have input?
I always have something to say, apparently. So I have two, I think, important corrections that I think we need to make sure are in here. So as far as ownership, as of this last summer, when St. Louis Altenheim was sold, all of the skilled nursing facilities in St. Louis are for-profit organizations.
Okay.
And then as of last week, we are down to 14 of them as Sisters Mission is closed. So that's another piece. We had 15, but now we're down to 14.
Thanks.
So as far as and I don't know if we want to start talking about recommendations yet.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
I've got one maybe concern or question specifically around the ombudsman piece, because that's what we do. So are we considering making this a city position, or what is the thought behind this? Because I want to make sure, so right now, St. Louis Area Agency on Aging contracts with Voice to provide the ombudsman program in St. Louis City. They're currently funding us a full-time person. Part of that is with ARPA money. So that is right now probably not a forever thing unless there's more money put into the system somewhere, somehow. So I think, when we're talking about putting enough for a full-time person, whether that's a city employee, which it almost kind of sounds like what this is, maybe we need to call it something else. But the one thing in here too is it mentions helping workers also access things. So the ombudsman program itself is a federal program, and it is specifically for residents. We help workers, but it's not in our charter to help workers. And so that can get into some sticky ground just with the way that the feds and the state do things.
I think when we originally envisioned this, it was specifically for workers, because you have the resident piece through Voice. And we put it in this recommendation a little bit more broadly. So, I mean, we could go back to just workers, accessing this position. I think the issue is, like, there's so many, we had a worker in here just like last week who was attacked by a resident. Those workers need to be able to access OSHA, make complaints, access talk to the state as well. It's hard for folks to do without a system that's out there. And so the thought is really that around workers.
Yeah, I think that we should probably separate residents and workers in that and call it something other than an ombudsman so that there's not confusion. even though I know that word's used in a lot of different
Yeah.
contexts, but I think could get messy.
Did you have any more, Ms. Moore?
I think the other one is, we heard so many great things from the building division. And I think some sort of recommendation to them continuing to exercise their power over what, what's going on in facilities is really important, because that's really the biggest lever I think we have here in the city is our buildings department. And I think that was certainly a concern. I know we didn't get to talk to the folks who do guardianship, but I think increasing funding for them is also really important.
I was gonna say, I see that kinda as 0.3, but maybe can be fleshed out to say directly, like calling out the building division. And I don't know if we put building division and like potential health department, but call them out because, like you said, I do think that as they spoke, they kind of work hand in hand, but we do need some entity to go out and, as we say, conduct. That could be, we should probably make that clearer of who will conduct it.
I would also add to what you're saying about the building division and recommendations to the city. Obviously, all these things are reliant on capacity and staffing, and if our recommendations are gonna rely on those departments, then I don't think it's ever anything wrong with at least recommending that they get additional funding to carry out those duties and to be able to carry out the enforcement. And I don't see that listed as a recommendation here.
So funding.
Increased funding for the building division and the Department of Public Health.
And I would just say, to jump in on that, with sitting on budget this last session, and maybe that's a conversation I could have with director of the building division to see what position exactly do these kind of, when they go and conduct investigations, so we can be also very clear that we're asking for more funding for 2 more inspectors to do X, Y, and Z, to ensure that it actually happens. Any other comment? I'm gonna go to Andrew, then I'm just work my way down. Could we pass the mic down to Mr. Andrew? And try to speak as clearly so the people on YouTube, or directly into the mic so people on YouTube can hear you.
So, about the building division, I think it would also be useful in the recommendations to talk about. I think there needs to be some kind of formal process by which the building division and the health department communicate. The kind of, right now it's sort of, at least I think in our discussion with them, they do communicate, but it's sort of on an ad hoc basis, and it's not a very well tracked. So perhaps in addition to additional funding, there might be specific language about how that process would work, and if that could be a recommendation at the city level, that might be something worth exploring. The other another recommendation, and this would be I think primarily on the state level, would be there's a program called, it used to be, still technically on the federal level, is called Money Follows the Person. In Missouri, that's called Show Me Home, I believe, and that is funding to help people transition from nursing homes. So if they can live in the community, then there's additional funding to help them transition and help them with costs of transitioning out of a nursing home, and especially when we talk in the report about people with severe mental illness and the fact that they're in these skilled nursing facilities, it would be, I think, beneficial to give folks more resources to try to live in the community, and in that way that would decrease the pressure on the facilities because they would potentially have fewer residents.
I believe Ms. Jamie, you're next on the floor. Unless did you have anything else, Mr. Andrew?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Jamie?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say, whoever wrote the report did a really wonderful job. So thank you for putting all this really good information together. And this is just a minor issue, but it kind of leads into a topic that I wanted to present. On page 1, it talks about for-profit ownership chains, and it talks about the roles of nursing homes and that they're supposed to be providing care to age disabled, and it says, and persons with mental illness who needs around-the-clock care. That actually is not a correct statement. It's not intended to care for people with mental illness. What's happened in our state is the closing of mental health hospitals. And so what's happened as a result is guardians who are overworked and have a lot of clients are simply going to any resource that they can find. And so as we think about our recommendations in the short term, or maybe even intermediate term, to be able to provide training to nursing home staff about mental health, the needs of the mental health population is a good strategy. But the long-term outcome should be that we should not be having younger people with mental health issues in nursing homes. That is not the proper place for them. And so then it leads me to just a thought that I would like to get feedback on. Laura, I like how this is divided into 3 focus areas: changes in ownership, changes in resident population, changes in staffing practices. I'm wondering if we should put a 4th bullet that talks about the changes in funding in Missouri for long-term care. Because just like the governor just vetoed the funding for ombudsman care, Missouri is unique in that, Margie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but just the number of the number of hours that nurses have to care for people, we're 50th out of 50 states, and yet we're continuing to underfund this service. So I'm wondering what you all think about adding how Missouri is unfortunately unique and how we're exacerbating the problem.
And it sounds like she opened that up to any and everybody, so please, somebody, before I go to Ms. Bradley, I know her hand is open, but did anybody want to piggyback off of what Ms. Jamie said?
Jamie's right.
So maybe we can probably go back and see how horribly we've been funding that and add potentially that as a point. Because I know a lot of times when we do talk about, you know, recommendations, and like Alderwoman Sonye said, you know, it always comes back to the funding. And, you know, I think highlighting how horrible that Missouri is not funding our long-term facilities would just be also a good point to mention as well, like you said, Ms. Jamie. Did you?
That was actually in the earlier draft, so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So you got it. You're right.
And, Mr. Andrew, your point about the money follows the person is also in it. So maybe I could, get with you guys and figure out what that would look like to add that. But that is, that's something that we thought about as well. But it felt like we didn't have enough testimony on that to actually sort of break that one out. We didn't really have we had the testimony from Mark Unruh on how nursing homes sort of in the whole United States are funding, but we didn't have anybody that said, this is how it's different in Missouri from how it's different from the rest of the United States. So I think we would have to actually kind of pool some knowledge on that to actually pull that together and put it in the report a little bit. But I could see having a bullet or a recommendation on it for sure.
And kind of before I go to Ms., well, I go to Ms. Bradley. You can go ahead.
Well, I definitely agree with getting more state funding for mental health care facilities, but as well, I agree with the idea of having the building division, giving them more capacity, because what I see in this is exactly what we're seeing in the entire housing space. So this isn't just happening in long-term care facilities. We know in housing in general, these large LLCs, venture capitalist funds from out of state are buying these properties and doing the exact same thing with management companies, and resident care and just regular buildings is going down in St. Louis as well, and in St. Louis County. And so anytime you're gonna put more on the building division in St. Louis City and the health division, I think getting them more funding to specifically work on this, because I know right now they're also at capacity dealing with the exact same issue in just regular residential living.
Any other just input on the report? So, I was about to say Alderwoman Ingracia, Director of Operations, Ingracia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to add on to the pieces about the city. I think the state and federal recommendations are important, but the city ones are critical because that's what we have control over. And I think that we need to make sure that the ordinances that are already on the books, the city is implementing correctly. If they're not, we need to find out why. And then the pieces that we're adding on, I think they need to be a bit more specific. So I would be happy to work with Department of Human Services, the Health Department, and the Building Division, because I think it's important that we have their input. We don't have to have their approval, but we need their input to kind of figure out where the sticking points are, and then to be as specific as possible so we understand what the funding piece looks like, because this is going to be an ask likely next fiscal year.
Thank you, Director. Alderwoman Sonia, then I'll go to Laura.
I was gonna say that I agree with Alderwoman Gracia. I think this is a good start, but I'm just, especially the city ones, city recommendations, because if they are broad in ask and recommendations, and they will be broad in implementation and advocacy, like arguably these need to be things where we can, as specifically as possible, myself and Alderman Aldridge and whoever else aligns can go back and have specific asks for departments, for the board to pass this legislation. But if it's really broad and open-ended, I think it makes it harder for us to like lift that up and make those specific asks. And it also will make it easier for others who might not see this as a priority with funding and resources and staff capacity to put it under the belt, because it is so broad. So I just really want to echo what the Honorable Gracia said.
So just quickly, I think one of the recommendations is to increase the Medicaid per diem rate to match the Medicare rate with a percentage allowed for workforce recruitment and retention. So that gets a little bit to the funding piece of how are we actually going to afford this. It's right, that would be a huge step up in terms of funding. But yeah, I agree with what folks are saying as well.
Any more input like on, I know I got a lot of scribbles on my piece of paper, but comments on the rough draft of the recommendation?
I'll just say one more thing on this. It's really important that there's controls on where the money goes, because these owners are really smart at sucking up any spare pennies, so it's really, we need to make sure that the money's going to workers and it's going to patient care, and that's how we want to that stuff.
Ms. Jamie, I see you had your hand up. No, don't, we're here as long as we need to be here. You're fine.
Well, it has to go back with, we have a system in place for hotlining people and so forth. And what I still don't seem to understand is how it can be hotlined and 6-7 months later it hasn't changed. And so there needs to be a closing of the loop somehow. And I see this at a state level as a state recommendation. So I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that is something that I would think you know, maybe other states have maybe some models that we could look at. I do know that there is work that Ms. Moore is doing with a grant that's focused on elder abuse and neglect. And so we know that in Missouri, it's just a misdemeanor to abuse and or neglect an older adult. That right there should be changed. We're 35 years in Missouri behind the children's laws. And so that to me needs to be a recommendation at a state level as well.
Any other comments? Oh, go ahead.
I'll piggyback off of that. And especially with COVID being the way it was, it really just showed up. It just showed how poorly that the nursing homes was doing. When you do a hotline call, they come out. Sometimes don't come out until later down the road. They don't have the people to come out to do the investigations. So they're falling through the cracks. So we need to get that.
So, and we can continue the discussion, but one thing that I think would be helpful before we pull all this together to have another conversation about where we are on the report is ideally, there's a few members that are not here this week. Would love to have a meeting next week. However, it is a holiday time. I forgot Labor Day is around and we got member because all our hardworking men and women in the union fought hard for us. So next week is Labor Day, and instead of switching it from Mondays, because I think Mondays work with most people's schedule, want to stay consistent, looking at potentially on the 11th having a Zoom meeting for the ones who is not here to also add input. But I would like to, as the chair, and also get people's input, is set up a smaller subcommittee that can really take a lot of the inputs from the recommendations. It seems like overall with the report, we got a good kind of support on the framework. I think something that Alderwoman Ingracia, or Honorable Ingracia and Alderwoman Sonia mentioned is, how do we get really deep into the recommendations so that we give tangible things to the board as we put out this report, so that they don't take all the hard work that this committee has been doing and look at it differently. You know, calling out directly the health department, calling out the buildings division. So if people are okay with it, I would like to set up just a smaller committee that can meet hopefully next week, that can really spend some time hammering already on this great framework that we got, to really hammer to add things to it. So then that following week, when we meet on the 11th, that Monday, which we're gonna call it out there for the 11th, but when we meet that 11th at 3:00, we have some more teeth to already a great draft to the report. Is that something is okay with the committee? And I see head nods. So the second thing is, to that breakout session or working group, who would like to be part of it? I know myself would be on it. Okay, I see two. Okay, let me write this down. Any over on this side? It's okay though. So what I'll do is I'll get with I got you, Mr. Andrew. I'll get with the folks that want to be on the small workout working group, in which, since we won't have a quorum, we won't have to meet via Zoom or in person. Well, we'll meet via Zoom, but it doesn't have to be live because we won't have a quorum, for us to really hammer down some of these recommendations. So, and then before the committee meets on the 11th, we can send out the rough draft to the rough draft to see what more can be added from fellow members that was not here. I guess with that, I'd like to make a motion that the long-term special committee on long-term healthcare set up a working group so that they can dive deeper into the recommendations. So we'll be prepared for the August or the September 11th meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Before we continue on, any more with the discussion on where we currently are with the rough draft of the committee?
I should probably talk very loud.
Oh, sorry.
Well, just for the people on TV that.
This might be sort of small, but I'm wondering if before that subcommittee gets together, if it would be helpful to have track changes. These things are not content necessarily related, but just maybe wording or phrasing or suggestions that might help the document overall. Would that be something that we collect from the full committee?
And you kind of led into my other point. So, what I also plan to do is there are already me and Director of Operations kind of looked at it. There are some just minor grammar things that need to be fixed. So, what I'll do after this meeting is put the document in a Word. Does Word work with everybody? A Word form where we all can add any changes that we see on top of some changes that was already highlighted. Add changes, just a small one, so that will give a good start to the working committee outside of really diving into the recommendation stage. So it'll be a Word doc that everyone can be able to edit to. If there is any edits or changes that you see, we can add to it. And then the working group committee will then add changes to the recommendation. So as we do continue to move forward before the 11th meeting, that all committee members can make sure that we are kind of in a best spot possible to maybe take a vote on the draft on the 11th if that's something comfortable with the committee.
Can I make a quick suggestion of Google Docs?
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant, Google Docs. Is it Google Docs? What you had me on? Okay, so instead of Word, Google Docs, that's what I mean. I'm supposed to be the technology savvy person, you know? But yes, does everyone have Google? Okay. Okay, so if actually, Director, could you, since you already have a doc, could you add all members to the Google Doc? Okay. Any other suggestions, recommendations, comments?
I have one. In the document we read,
You just speak up on it just a little more.
get closer. So in the document, we talk about nursing home care standards and number of hours per day. We have the data for St. Louis City and what each facility reported to CMS that they were providing each day. From the most recent is from the second quarter of the fourth quarter of 2022. I've got that here. So I think it would be good to include, because we talk about how how few in Missouri actually meet that standard, but currently none of the facilities in the city are meeting that standard. So I think that might be something good to include, and I'm happy to share that.
If you could, do you have a PDF version of that also?
Yeah.
If you could send that out to the whole committee, also the BOA clerk, so it's in the drive, that'd be helpful. And then once the doc is added, please put that as a side note in that. I know a lot of us have took notes of just some things that we need to change. So as we all do enter that Google Doc, if you notice that something is missing, please add to it. This is our committee, and want to make sure that this is everyone's voice and changes and edits that need to be in it is added in the documentation. So as Director Ingracia adds everyone to the committee or to the Google Doc, please just start going in to make this beautiful rough draft even more beautiful so that we don't miss anything. Any other comments, questions, concerns? If not seeing any, again, just on the discussion part of it, like I say, I will send an email out to everyone who wants to be on the working group so we can figure out a time next week to be able to meet to, I think, mainly flush more into the recommendations and add some input from what was said today into some of the larger framework, you know, like adding potentially a fourth point about funding and work with our research kind of team that, thank you to SEIU, have been helpful with doing a lot of that in that research to make sure that that is added. And then some other things that was mentioned, as well as be on the lookout again, hoping if it works for everybody that September 11th, just by like a quick look at your calendar, does September 11th, that's a Monday, so not this Monday, but it'll be the following Monday, 3 o'clock via Zoom. Just have another conversation about the recommendations. If that works, that'll be great. I will send out an email to make sure that that works with everybody, including the people that are not here, but that's the date that ideally I'll be sending out to see if we can meet via Zoom at 3 o'clock. And I mentioned it earlier at the beginning of the meeting. So after the recommendation phase, which is kind of phase one, making sure that all the hard work that we've been doing and making sure that everyone's input around the recommendations is to a point where the committee is comfortable. I think the second phase after that, which can work depending, the second phase would be a design phase. I know one of the things that we mentioned during the committee was making sure we get kind of a personal element to it with workers' voices, residents' voices to it to add to the committee. And then the phase three would be a media rollout to make sure all the hard work that this committee put into it, that the media is aware about it. And then we'll deliver that committee or to this report to the Board of Aldermen, which they go back in session on the 15th. If we're not done by the 15th, that is fine. We're not charged to be done by the 15th. That's just when the board go back in. But want to ensure as the board go in that they get this report so legislation can start moving, which we got a whole year of session. It won't take us a whole year just to complete the recommendation. But with that being said, I don't want anybody to feel like we're rushed to have to get this done. But I do know that President Green is very looking forward to seeing the report to figure out how we can take a lot of these recommendations and actually make it into legislation. So I think that's what's going to be important, that we flesh out exactly who we call it on to make some of these changes. As people have been coming in front of us, which departments are we calling on so we actually can have from these recommendations a concrete legislation that all the people can take charge on. If there's no more comment on the discussion phase, I'll move to any announcements from committee members. Seeing no announcements, Madam Clerk, can you excuse all members who is not present today? If nothing else is on anyone's hearts and minds, again, I want to thank SEIU for hosting us for our first live meeting. It's good to see a lot of y'all faces out of Zoom and actually be in y'all presence. And like I say, each meeting, it is an honor to take the baton that Alderwoman Gracia started with the hard work that this committee laid out to be part of it, and look forward to seeing us make a lot of the experts' input and comments from the experts on this committee into a report that we actually can make, not just a report that sits on the table, but true legislation once the board go back in, and hopefully once our state and federal partners also get back to work. With that being said, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Or so moved. Second, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion adjourned, or meeting adjourned.